to the first series of virtual conversations on the economic impact of COVID-19 in Latin America and Canada, the way forward. My name is Sofia Cerrato. I'm the ambassador of the Republic of Honduras and dean of the GRULA, the Latin American group in Canada. On behalf of my colleagues, I would like to welcome and thank you for joining. We would also like to extend our gratefulness for the participation to the authorities of the Government of Canada and the business sector to participate in this series of events. Our goal is to create meaningful dialogue around this issue, and in order for us to do this most effectively, we highly encourage each and every one of you to contribute to the discussion by submitting any questions you may have through our various platforms. You may direct these questions through our Facebook, GRULA Canada, our YouTube channel, and our Zoom platform. For those attending through our Zoom, we kindly ask you to use the raise your hand option. Latin America is currently in its phase of greatest confinement. However, we are taking the appropriate measures to reopen our economies for the normalization and control of the pandemic. While this is happening, our governments have responded with monetary stimulus and fiscal policies to try to mitigate the economic effects of the pandemic. Our central banks have provided the necessary liquidity to maintain the chain of payments and channel loans to households and companies, and maintaining the stability of the banking systems. On the fiscal side, tax cuts have been made and health expenditures have increased for the mitigation phases. And during the recovery stage, there are plans to increase the infrastructure investment. I believe this time presents Latin America an opportunity to accelerate the transition to grow into a more productive, sustainable, and equitable region through investment in new, green, and digital technology and the expansion of social safety net. And now, with further ado, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome our panelists. The Honorable Mary Ng, Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion, and International Trade. Minister Ng is a devoted community leader who has always believed in the power of public service. She has 20 years of experience in the areas of education, women leadership, job creation, and entrepreneurship. She immigrated to Canada from Hong Kong with her family and grew up learning about the struggle and eventual success that many immigrants experience in Canada. Her years working for the Ontario Public Service, Ryerson University, and the Ontario Ministry of Education led her to being recognized as one of Canada's top performing public sector leaders. She later served as Director of Appointments for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Also with us today, Peter Hall, Vice President and Chief Economics of Export Development Canada. Peter has over 25 years of experience in economic analysis and forecasting. He is responsible for overseeing EDC's economic analysis, country risk assessment, and corporate research groups. In addition to preparing strategic advice for senior management at EDC, Mr. Hall is a featured speaker at conferences, international roundtables, and policy forums, and regularly appears in television, radio, and print media. He produces a widely circulated print and video weekly commentary, which is very popular among us, covering an eclectic range of current global economic issues. Prior to joining EDC, Mr. Hall served at the Conference Board of Canada. He has also served as president of both the Canadian Association for Business Economics and its largest local chapter, the Ottawa Economic Association. And last but not least, Mr. Mario Cimoli, Deputy Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Mr. Cimoli is also Chief of the Division of Production, Productivity, and Management, and Officer in charge of the Division of International Trade and Integration. He co-chairs two of the task forces of the Initiative for Policy Dialogue at Columbia University, a PhD in economics from the University of Sussex. His research deals with development path, economic growth, and its relationship with the productive structure and international trade. His work examines the interconnections between industrial policy, technological development, and innovation. Mr. Simoli has also contributed with many impressive publications. We are glad to have you with us today. Thank you and welcome. I will now hand it over to our moderator, Ambassador of Mexico to Canada, His Excellency Juan Jose Gomez Camacho. Thank you.
Sofia, gracias. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Minister, Peter, Mario, our very distinguished panelists. Before starting, if you allow me a couple of words on how we collectively in our group of ambassadors from Latin America decided to start organizing these kind of events. We've been talking, of course, as everybody is around this or about this complex issue. And it's very obvious that the pandemics is the most, at least through our lifetimes, or most of us lifetimes, is the most transformational event we have experienced. And clearly, things will not be the same, I have to say, ever again, for different reasons. The social, the economic, the political impacts, the human impacts are just staggering. So we are adapting, or we have to adapt. We tend to believe, if we read the news and what is around, that the virus will go and we will come back more or less to the way we were. And my impression so far, but this is me, is that the virus will not go. The vaccine, in the best scenarios, is still months away. And even if the vaccine comes, or when the vaccine comes, it'll take quite a lot of time to really achieve some meaningful immunization globally. And even when we do that, more viruses will come. So this is fundamentally transformational, or transforming, having a transformational effect globally. And in Latin America, as anywhere else in the world, we are, on the one hand, facing the pandemics, trying to protect our people. Our governments are doing the very best, the utmost to ensure that people remain safe. But at the same time, as again, we have been discussing within our group, at the same time, we have to try to mitigate first as much as possible the enormous economic impact that this is creating, and to revive, revitalize, reinvent, adapt the economy so the damage is less and we can recover as soon as possible. It's a terrible dilemma, and it's a terrible process of equilibrium, keeping on the one hand people safe and making sure that their livelihoods are also safe. And this is exactly where we are. As Sofia just said, Latin America is now going through the most difficult phase of the pandemics. And at the same time, as ECLAC and the IMF and other entities have been saying, we are also going through a very tough economic moment, and the forecasts look pretty difficult. I should also say then, and that's where Canada comes to the play, not only because Canada is part of our region, is a close, dear country for all of us, but also because, as and we always say it here and there, our well-being, our future is very much interconnected. Foreign policy is not anymore just about traditional diplomacy, but ensuring that we all, accepting that we all are on the same boat, we all help each other, we all work together to make sure that we all improve. And that's through wealth generation, business, investment, and many other things. And Latin America is a region of more than 600 million people, young, thriving, energetic, ready to keep working. So Latin America has all the ingredients to come out from this stronger and to really achieve our goals in the future in a very successful way. That if we do things right now, correct now. And again, Canada, in our view, is part or central part of all these efforts, and we like to believe that Canada believes the same. Having said that, I will start offering the floor. Just a quick mention of the technology here that I understand is being informed. We are transmitting through different networks. Whoever wants to make a question, please, I think you have there chats and all kinds of signals, so you can send your question in a written version. And in the case of our colleagues, the ambassadors of Latin America, they are in our Zoom network, so they will be able to ask their questions by themselves, and we will see them by themselves, and we will see them in the monitor or in the screen. So, Minister, it's an enormous pleasure, as we said before, having you here with us. We are really honored that you took the time to talk to us. You are very, very busy, but your words are very much look forward. And if I may add, this is for you, for us, for the American people. We're just a few days to have finally the new NAFTA, or CUSMA, as you call it here, TMEC, as we call it there, entering into force. And I think even if it is a North American deal, North American free trade zone, it will have far more economic impact, not only in Latin America, but in other regions as well. And that we also feel very, very proud. Minister, I have the honor to give you the floor.
Well, thank you so very much this morning for allowing me a bit of time. Ambassador, the way in which you've opened it now makes me want to be here for the entire session, and I'm afraid that that I'm not able to do the whole, the entire session, but it just sounds like such a perfect conversation for all of us to be having. But Your Excellencies, it really is my honor to join all of you, and I want to thank you, Ambassador Gomez Camacho, and of course, Ambassador Serrato, the wonderful Dean of GRULA, for inviting me to this webinar this morning. And I hope you are all well. I hope your families are safe during these unprecedented times. And COVID-19 has certainly shown the world that we are, and I couldn't agree with you more, that we are more connected now than we've ever been before. And this crisis has reinforced Canada's need to work with our partners, to trade, and to continue to develop the relationships that are so important for Canada in terms of diversification and in terms of where and how we trade. And certainly with Latin America and the region, it is just not only are we friends and have been friends for such a long time, the opportunity to continue to work together and to fight COVID-19, but also to address all of those very issues that the ambassador just talked about is quite important and critical. We know that during this time that global supply chains have come under significant pressure. We've seen that over-reliance on a single supplier or a customer is a critical risk for businesses and for governments. And this has raised the question about whether the solution lies in increasing a country's domestic capacity in certain sectors or in greater trade diversification. And we know, though, that these two pathways are not mutually exclusive. Canada is a trading nation, and diversification has to be a part of our solution. I've been saying this, COVID-19 should not and cannot be used as an excuse to stop trading or to turn inward with protectionist policies. It's why throughout this crisis, I and my colleagues have been working closely with international partners, whether it is the G20, and of course, all of us are members of the World Trade Organization, APEC and others, to ensure that our supply chains remain open, our businesses can continue their work, and that essential goods and services can flow to the Canadian people and to people around the world at this very critical time. And certainly as Canada is turning their attention to the global economic recovery, international collaboration is going to be even more critical. And I agree with you, Ambassador. It is a balance. It's a balance for all of us. Certainly, Canada is not different. The balance of keeping our people safe and healthy, and meeting. We've made good progress. We've done some good work. It's taken all Canadians, and really a Team Canada effort to flatten this curve in Canada. But keeping this progress and making sure that we don't lose it is very critical to us. So as we are reopening the economy, we are doing it with that balance in mind, the safety of our people and how we continue to build on our already strong relationships. And certainly with Latin America and the region, we have excellent relationships and strong trade agreements. And we want to make sure that our business owners and our entrepreneurs continue to know about the opportunities and can access the customers that we've made available through our various trade agreements, but also through multilateral agreements like the CPTPP, some of whom are a part of that. And of course, there certainly are opportunities. We would love those opportunities as well around the Pacific Alliance and Mercosur, because it really is, we are so interconnected. And I think it really is about trade in both ways. And at every opportunity, we're also working towards sustainable recovery, making sure that everyone, including small businesses, Indigenous business owners, women entrepreneurs, really the micro businesses can access the opportunities and the benefit of trade. Trade works when it can derive benefits to our people, all of our people in all of our countries. And we know that international collaboration is not strictly about economic partnership. We must also work together to protect and to support our people as well. COVID-19 is a global pandemic. It's impacting people around the world. We are all in this together, and we must all work together in order to fight this virus and to keep our people safe. It's why Canada has provided some support through the Pan America Health Organization, as well as some targeted funds through the Canada Funds for Local Initiatives, so that we can help and contribute in the region to the safety of people during this difficult time. Overcoming this pandemic is going to require coordinated action around the world to provide the support to those who are going to need it the most. Overall, Canada maintains an important presence and fosters strong people-to-people ties and connections across Latin America and the region, supporting projects that will focus on gender equality, on climate change, on health, on education, food security, governance, and human rights. Now more than ever, it's imperative that we continue to work closely together. And even through these challenging times, we want to build our relationships, close relationships with Latin America and the region, strengthening our economic relationship and deepening our people-to-people ties. I know we are going to get through this together. And as the world gradually takes steps to restarting our economies, we'll keep supporting our businesses, our workers, and indeed all Canadians. And we are going to, we're committed to doing this, and I look forward to our continued to work together, Your Excellencies. And thank you so very much for giving me a bit of your time this morning on your agenda. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much.
On the contrary, Minister, thank you so much for your words. And before you go, 2 comments to what you said that are critical. You're absolutely right on everything you said, but there are 2 that I would like to mention. One is that we indeed need to fight the sort of natural tendency to shut down, to close the borders, because we feel, or we may feel, more protected, and therefore to be more protectionist in these times of fear and chaos. That's what normally people tend to do. But you're totally right that we need to fight that, because in fact, more trade, global trade, international trade, bilateral, regional, in fact, is a vehicle to create wealth, to create well-being. And that takes me to your second point. Trade should not benefit only some. The challenge of trade It's truly to make sure that everyone in our countries can actually benefit from it, that it can actually create the wealth well distributed as we want. And this is also why it's so interesting that you mentioned the very small micro businesses, small companies, those that are 3, 4 family businesses that have to have the chance to also join these bigger value chains. I couldn't agree more with you that that's the way we will really change. And in Mexico, Canada, and I think it's pretty much the thinking of Latin America, that's what we want. And one last thing, if I may say, cooperation. We always use the word cooperation almost like a commonplace. It has become a sort of cliche, and it hasn't ever been as true as it is today, or as needed as it is today. No cooperation, I think we will all fail. And in that cooperation, and this is the spirit of what we are doing, is where we want Canada with us, with Latin America and the Caribbean. So thank you so much, Minister, for your words, and I'm sure there will be many comments and questions around of what you just said. Now, if you allow me, I go to my distinguished friend, Peter Hall. Peter is, I have to say, and Minister will agree with me, is an incredibly lucid economist. I have listened to him a couple of times, and it's always really, really on point, very deep on the economics of Latin America and the challenges we have. He spends a lot of time traveling in the region. So Peter, we are eager to hear your. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, I said all the good things about Peter now, but I'm corrected. I need to go to Mario Cimoli. So Mario, ECLAC, or CEPAL, as we call it in Spanish, and you might know this institution, Minister, is a UN institution, has played over the last decades, many decades, an extraordinary role in providing the region with great economic thinking, economic, social reflection. And throughout the pandemia, or the pandemics led by Alicia Bárcena, I have to say a very dear, distinguished Mexican, it has been providing ideas, reflection, proposals, and also some very, very tough radiographies of the challenges that are being faced by Latin America today. So Alicia can't be with us, but she's super well represented by Mario, who is a very talented economist as well. So Mario, you have the floor, and thank you for being here with us this morning.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I send the regards from Alicia to all of you, the ambassador, and I will try to go directly to the presentation because I think we have important data and important analysis of the recent evolution, what's happening in the region. I want to try to share the screen with you to tell me if everything is fine. And if there is, if you are looking at the presentation, that it seems to be right. I don't know.
Yes. Yes, Mario.
Okay. Okay. Now I will try to go directly to the point, and I think it's very important. You know, yesterday you have a new data about what is the evolution of the crisis, the economic crisis. And we have the data from IMF that said clearly that the data about growth, trade, and other variables associated to unemployment, they are going to behave very badly. And that's more badly than we thought about that in the last 2 or 3 months. This is a point that ECLAC put on the table at the beginning of April, and we have launched an observatory of the COVID-19, and this observatory that we have and is extended around the whole world, but particularly dedicated on our region, our countries, And in this observatory, we have clearly that we put in that on the table 1 or 2 months ago, that this crisis is more deep crisis that we saw before. And on the other side, the recovery is going to be more complicated, and there is a lot of uncertainty there. And I want to show in this context what are the particular characteristics of the region. What's happened with Latin America? Where are they specificity and some policy guidelines that could be important to recover in the better way, recovery with more equality, with more social inclusion, with more productivity. But I want to put clearly, there is a lot of uncertainty. Many persons are speaking about this crisis, but the uncertainty, how the social system is going to answer, how the production system is going to answer, the trade system is going to answer. It's difficult to have a clearly predetermination of that. And I want to begin with this slide that I think is very important. And this slide shows clearly that this crisis is very similar. And we thought, and in 2 weeks' time, we are going to have the projection and estimation of ECLA about growth. And I can tell to you that this crisis is going to be a crisis that has a dimension and deepness that is really, you can compare, you can put at the same level of what's happened in the First World and the Second World War, in the recession in the 30s, and more deeper probably we know that on the crisis of 2018. And clear the number of economy, there is a domino effect that is clearly impacting all of the region and all of the countries. On the other side, I want to be very honest about that. We're speaking about after the crisis of 2008 that you remember that's imagine that the globalization is working well, that there was that globalization, that this expanded continuously in the world and there is no interruption that we have had 5, 6, 10 years ago. Now, in the mind of people, in the mind of economists, in the mind of many people, the political decision makers, this vision is not more true. People understood that there is a problem in globalization, but this problem began before the COVID-19. There is a problem on trade, there is a problem in equality, and you can see clearly that the data about trade is decreasing before of what's happening in these recent crises. And this I want to say, this quoted unquote, this process of deglobalization was a beginning, a slow process that today was impacted very strongly. This process was more marked, this process was more deeper, and clearly we have to understand that. This is not, this crisis arrived in a particular context at the level of the global economy. And I want to go immediately what's happening in the region. I want to know what is the diagnosis that ECLA is doing about that. And I think it's very important to have, because when we speak about what's happening in this moment, in this crisis, how the region faced these processes is very to understand clearly that the global context, there was diminution on trade, there was growth processes that were not so very imperative, so very high level of growth. And arrive this crisis, and the region, you find a region that has structural problems that is very important to understand before to calculate the impact of this crisis, because if we can resolve this problem, it's very difficult, came through this crisis in the better way in terms of equality, growth, and performance. And I want to put clearly this, because this is a graphic that put the debate, because when we speak about our region, we have to be clearly that our specificity, our structural condition is very important to understand that. It's very important to understand how they are related among them. And now I think it was clearly a health impact. All of the countries introduced containment measures. There was a contraction of the supply and global demand. And what we note clearly, suspension of production lines, filing international trade, investment contraction. Today, speaking about investment in this day, come on, we have an excess of production capacity around the world economy. We have an excess of production capacity in China, in Europe, in the States, in Canada, in Latin America too. It is very difficult to speak about investment. You have investment when there is opportunity, something's changed, or you arrive at the limit of production of capacity. And there was a suspension of the internal production activity also in the region. You ambassadors know very well what is happening in your country. This debate about opening the economy, reduce the measure of social constraints, and to product, because we have an enormous demand from population, that there is an enormous part of our population that require, that need to come out of the houses and to have jobs and to have income. And the suspension of internal production activity in the region was clearly a point that arrived at the end of the global processes. And the first step was China. China's affected Europe. Europe affected all of the countries in Europe, diffused it to the United States and Latin America. United States is closing production activity, now it's opening part of it, and the region is affected. You can understand that this is a domino effect, where we know clearly how is the impact of the summatory of this process. It's not only our region. When we look at our region, we have to understand that we are the end of the chain of the process that began in China, was developed about Europe, arrived to America, bring to Latin America, and all of the countries are this context of suspension of production activity. At the moment we have this, I think, this worry processes that you have reduction of production plus diminution of demand. You don't have demand, because we are going to see the middle classes, the people that can expend, don't expend the resources. And that is happening in Europe, that is happening in the States, that's happening in Latin American countries. And we have the complication of the processes. It's not only, and we have these so complicated economic processes, we don't have clearly the solution. The solution of this and how is evolving many of the variables is very difficult. There is a lot of uncertainty on that. And I want to put clearly, high uncertainty, consumption reduction, classes of firms, and we are going to see what's happening with the middle and small firms, and difficulty for large company. And when I write these processes, which are the main feature of the region? Which are the main characteristics of the region? That is very important to understand, because we arrived of 7-8 years of very reduced rate of growth. The rate of growth in the region was, don't arrive to achieve about 2%, more or less. And not only few countries arrived the growth rate that was superior at 3%. And clearly what's happening here is that the region arrived in this country with a very low rate of growth, many of the countries, and with a structural condition that are very difficult to don't have in our mind when we want to understand what are the policies to come out of this terrific, with this crisis that really is impacting all of us. And I want to be very clear. What is our diagnosis? There is an insufficient and fragmented welfare system. And we can see it clearly, not only in the sanitary system, we are going to see some number about that, but also in the social welfare system. We take what's happening clear about pension. You have to understand what is subsidies for workers. And it was a system that was very segmented. It's not a right of the whole population. And we are going to see one of the crucial variables, that is informality. We have in the region about more of the 40 and 50% in different countries of people that is informal. The welfare system can achieve these people. And many of these informal activities are firms, and a small, very reduces informal activity and firm. It's clearly our system, because the expenditure, because our idea of welfare system was not increasing in the last year, was we have from the 80s and 70s a condition that have reduces a lot of our welfare system. Today it's very difficult to have an extended welfare system where we can achieve a large part of population, particularly with informal activity. This is, when we speak about informal, what is important informal for us? Because when we compare with Europe, we compare with other different countries, informal for us is a crucial, because it's what is the character? People is not informal because people we know clearly don't want to pay taxes. People is informal because the condition of our production structure can absorb formally these people, and our weak industrial policy don't give to them the possibility to increase and to create a new production capacity. This informality is one of the most specific characteristic that is going to have an enormous impact and the negative effect of this crisis. And we have a production structure that's very concentrated. It's very, in many countries, based on natural resources. We have a small and medium firms with very low productivity. And part of these small and medium firms has concentrated and informal activity. Informal activity, they have very low productivity. We have external constraint, you know, how clearly the demand for dollars that have the region is one of the variables that affect our policy and macro policy clearly every time that we have a crisis. We have a structural inequality. I want to stop here. If you say that this region is the region that have a very high level of inequality, everybody knows that. I know about that. But what happened recently, we have reduced the index coefficient. But today, with this, the last 4 or 5 years before this, I call this epidemic crisis, clearly this inequality had been reduced. But today, in the last 4 or 5 days, has increased again. And now, which are our projection, is an increasing enormous amount of the index coefficient that is going to affect what is the inequality. And again, go back to informal. Think about informal. Think about the difficulty. And you know, the ambassador of Mexico, that where your president was at the beginning was worried about the sector. And you know, in Honduras, what people was worried about that. In Chile, that it was a country that has formalized a large part of activity. Also, there was a very worry about the government, how to arrive and to achieve this population. Informality, we can look at Latin America with the same characteristics of the other economy if you don't put in this particular condition what is informal, which is our worry about that. I think he's asking at all of you are going to say to me, I want to come better of this situation. I want to come better out of this situation with more equality, with more productivity, with more export, with more import, and everything like that. That is a willingness that we have. But clearly, I think we are going to in the adverse side. It's probably that we came in this condition if we don't implement a structural policy in terms of production, productivity, welfare system, and so on, a more regressive transformation, increased poverty and economic vulnerability. Don't forget that many of Latin American countries are middle-income countries, that everybody think that these countries has achieved a high level of income and everything is what is about cooperation and so on. They can be part of that. But you have to have in your mind clearly that we have this middle-income country, we have an enormous vulnerability of middle-income classes. And that is what's happened today. Difficulty to contain this measure, and the ambassador said clearly before that we have this pressure for informality activity for large part of population, that income of these people came in every day for their activity out of the houses. Health emergency. And I want to give an information, very telegraphic information, what is the condition of it. What's happening in this situation, like that's many of the Latin numbers of hospital beds was very reduced. When arrived this crisis, the number of hospital beds was very reduced, and that has happened because, and I want to be very honest, and you have to understand, this austerity policy in 20 years reduced the capability to expand the health system and to have the more inclusive health system. Number of beds is very bad, and we are increasing, but in context of emergency, and that's very difficult because you can put a bed, but how you can see in the other figure, we don't have the number of doctors that is requiring this condition. But behind this, what is very important, that these processes affect clearly the most poor population. There is a large part of population that is people with the more posted the seal of the economy, that these people don't have any insurance, don't have any support, are informal to what is the access of health system, are informal because they don't have any insurance condition that can support and pay the health system for them. And that is a condition. We have informality, people that don't arrive to have this condition of healthy, and people don't have insurance. And this clearly is affecting a large part of population that is zooming back. It's poor people, informal, exclusive person, what we call invisible people. And the condition when they arrive, the first thinking about the 2 or 3 slides is needed. We know that. It's needed to rebuild about the welfare system in the region. It's important to put in the first place which type of health system that we need. It is important to consider in that how we can include that our invisible population that are informal activities, people that don't have any kind of insurance, to create more homogeneous health system where people can achieve. But I want to go to crisis and what's happened with this crisis. This is a very clear figure. I can't. If you look this figure, every of you can say what ECLAC said 2 or 3 months ago. We are estimated that the growth rate in the region has to be 5.3 minus. And today, everybody, and we assume that this is going to be more than that. If you compare 2020 with the other 2 crises, you are not clearly looking that this crisis is going to be more deep and going to be more diffused. It probably is going to have an impact larger than there was the crisis in 1930 in the First World War. That is a process. Look, when there was the crisis in the 1914 and there was the crisis in the 30, they take 30 years. They came in the war. After of this came the World War, the Second World War. Clearly, you understand that we are going in the crisis that is going to be very deep and very, very strange because we have enormous uncertainty there. We have to rethink about policy and don't take only the number. Think what's happened in that period, in that historical period, at the beginning of the 19th, and what can happen here with this structural crisis. Okay. The export of the region is going to decrease, but import in the region is going to decrease, and the intra-trade is going to decrease. Of course, because there's a very pro-cyclical process depending on our income and depending on the income of the other region. That is the reason that we call this domino effect is going to impact in more structural way because we are at the beginning of the domino because it began with China, Europe, America, and is coming back, has a reverse from Latin America to the rest of the world. And that is clearly what's happening with export in the region that's going to decrease about the 15%. This is an estimation with the last number. Probably this number is going to be more than that. And that is an point. That is an point that I want to put clear. And then what said the Minister of Canada, and I think the idea of this meeting is very important. When we speak about the production structure, when we speak about the people that don't have jobs, person that don't have jobs, person that was an informal activity, very, very small firms and medium firms, we have to understand clearly that we have to find a market for the people because we can have for 10, 20 years for the welfare system of expenditure that can be sustaining in the very long term if we don't have a production system that can absorb employment, that can create employment for the person and so on and so on. And this is an important situation. This is only formal. Think about this is impact on informal activity. You have to assume on that the other side that is about 30 and 40% across the different countries, because country has different level of informality, we have an enormous impact also on a small and medium firms that are in informal activities. But to put clearly, in micro firms, we are going to arrive quite the same million firms going to be affected. A small and medium firm about 620,000 and large about 20,000. And clearly the impact of microfilm is going to be large. It's going to be deep. We don't know clearly how it's going to be diffused in the other part of the economy. And clearly, this is affecting employment. What is the very affected sector? Clearly, you know, what everything has to be related with tourism, everything that has to be with trade, wholesale, retails, goods reparation, hotel, restaurant, transportation, construction, storage and communication, general device. It's clearly, that's activity. And think about that. I don't have answer, because I have the proposal of policy and I put it clearly what are the most important policies. But it's clearly to understand. But if we have this impact on small and medium firms and so on in different sectors, what clearly we have in this figure is that when this activity is coming back, in your mind, in my mind, and many people are thinking about that, they think that the process and the thing are going to offset the same number of employment. It is not like that. When firms there is a strong pressure on firms to reduce employment, to reduce activity, to reduce such activities that are the core business for them. Clearly, when they are coming back to the market, we are having a structural reduction of employment with increasing of productivity, with reduction of cost. And this is a process we have to have in mind. In that point, we need to compensate and to work together without the social policy for inclusion, but also to have in our mind, the production industrial policy for this type of thing, because it's important to generate very quick imports. And what you said before, how to find markets for this thing is becoming important and more important and more important. And I hope that the agreement that Mexico and the North America is going to sign on that is going to be an enormous possibility for that. And I hope that the relation of you ambassadors that putting together that to resolve this problem, in not each country by itself that can solve that. We need more integration of our markets to give possibility for firms, small, large, and medium, to be integrated in this process. Then employment is going to increase. This is about 2,000 million people of employment, and I have to say before, it's not necessary when we have the recovery of the firm, this employment is going to be absorbed, all of them. Not all of them of this unemployment people is going to be absorbed, because firms are looking for more efficiency, more productivity, more innovation in plants. When you reduce the number of employment in a firm, when the firm is coming back after a crisis, the process is going to be more increase the efficiency. That is good because becoming more efficient, but on the other side, you have a strong problem on employment. And this is the number. This is the number that I want to put clearly on you. The region making enormous progress about what is poverty. In the last 4 or 5 years, as I said before, of this crisis, of this pandemic crisis, if you want to call that, what clearly came out is that we have reduced it in some way, and good indicators about unemployment and about inequality and poverty. But our estimation is that the number of people in poverty, falling poverty, is going to be about the 30 million person. It's a large number. Soon to these processes, what is in informality. And now you understand that when you begin to see this number, is we have a fragmented social system that we have to rebuild clearly, to have more fiscal resources for them. But on the other side, we need to intervene immediately on the production system and field to create employment. Both processes have to be put in together. It's very important because we need to solve this part, but we need to create the capability for employment. In that sense, to maintain the trade with intertrade in the region, intra-regional trade, but to trade with North America is going to be a very crucial environment. I can say to you that everything can be solved, but you are probably know better than me. You are ambassadors. You know the reality. When you say yes and no in your capabilities, you know better than me what is the reality. Okay, when you heard to speak an ambassador say yes or no, they know very clearly. And I want to put this figure for you because this figure is important. You remember the crisis that we had before of the debt crisis in Latin America. We have recovered in the rate of growth, in the growth term in 10 years. But to recover the social variables in terms of poverty take a lot more than 25 years. Our worry is what I said before, is that you can recover in 3-4 years, probably some positive rate of growth that is probably coming, but to recover in the social condition is going to take more time, more and a long time with uncertainty, tension, social, economic, and political tension. And you can see this clearly in this figure. When you have to recover in the social variable, it's going to take more difficult and more, I want to say, a more complex processes. And that is the reason to have a battery of policies that came from the social inclusion, production, trade agreement that we have to implement together. Only in that way we can put a more high recuperation and to have more soft detention and the human condition that clearly is going to be very badly. But the way how the social variable is going to adjust is going to be in the more long-term position. And clearly we need a composition of policy that have to look at what's happening today, but we have to begin with having the recovery, and this recovery, the social condition is going to take here in consideration with expansion of the production system. We launched with FAO a document. Alicia Bárcena and the director of FAO launched a document that clearly that is going to affect and risk for hunger, and that is clearly what's happening in the region. But there is a contradiction, you know. This is the region that produces a lot of food for the world, but you know, when you have this crisis of hunger and when you don't have food, many times it's not because you don't have food that is available. You don't have food because there is prices that are high, because there is a storage of food, because we don't want to send the food. That is required an enormous policy, not only to reactivate the social in production, but to maintain, to control, to have a very deep look about the capability of the countries to maintain a continuous flow of food to large part of the population. I know that many of the countries where you came from, we're not clear because we have studied that, and because you know that many of the countries that are presented here implemented a lot of policy, and you know that many of the policymakers in our region are worried about that. And that is creating more increasing in poverty, but at the same time, a risk for hunger is becoming increasing in different countries. And many times, I want to repeat that it's not because food is not there, it's because we need to control and to have more efficiently our production, transportation, and reallocation of food about the population. This is a new war, and I want to be. I don't know. I thought about that could be important to present to you, but I think it's only we don't have clearly what's happening here. But it's important that you see this number in the recovery processes. This process has interrupted production, you know, no? Capacity production has to be stopped. But on the other side, many people say that production capacity is stopped, but at the beginning, when production activity, we make that people can be free to contact with a particular standard. We have a more social contact, and we expand production. Everything is going to be happening again. How we thought about that, but that is what's not happening. Why? This is important. If you look at the expenditure of different population with credit card, people is saving a lot. People that can spend is saving. And people that can have to be large parts of population that have to increase and to have income go to the street, but there is expenditure, you know, because people that can spend are not spending. You can see this by the number of credit card expenditure, and there is this process of reduction of production capacity on one side. On the other side, we have the people are not demanding. That is something that's happening in Europe, and happening in different countries. That people is saving, don't expend, And if the people is not spending, we cannot activate the economy. This is creating that this reduction of production capacity is summing up a demand constraint that we have to open, because we need that the population expand in different countries, because we need to activate production activity. And this is an ECLAC representation of what's this new measure about what's happening with COVID-19 affecting. Look, this summary table, that is clearly. If you think about teleworking, everything that is stayed in Europe or Canada, I suppose, and the state and many parts of the state, many of large population can have a teleworking job. If you look, when you have teleworking group, this is particular for people that have, the people is saving, is the same person that can do teleworking, that don't need to spend on food because they can guarantee that, and saving a lot. But we take the low income population is the person that can have teleworking, people that need food, people that is increasing the debts, and people that are not saving in COVID. And you see the first line of the figure and the last line of the figure is increasing inequality. There is part of population that in this process is coming out, is putting out. And that's clearly there is a process that we don't have the number, but we understand clearly that the society is going to create a most division between medium, high income, and low income informality. This process increase of this variable, clearly you can see in this figure. And that is what's clearly in teleeducation, for example. We have estimated that the child between 5 and 12 years old in Latin America, the 40%, 44, 45%, half of the population of them, they can achieve teleeducation at a very high level. And why that? Because ICT don't arrive in the same way that arrive on the people that can do telework, because the ICT that arrive to the large part of population, if there is bad quality, if you are connected to do the teleeducation for the child, you cannot be connected, your wife cannot be connected, or the man and the woman can be connected, one of them, in particular is the man, and on the woman that is going to be connected, and you have this distribution among the family and the process. And we need to expand this. Many times we speak in that this process of teleeducation, teleworking is creating again more division in the region, more a gap between the population that have middle and high income and the population that have the low income. Teleeducation, teleworking, all of this activity, because our structure is creating this gap. And this is a worry about that, because we have this gap. This is a debate about instability, not only economic, but also social, but also political. And clearly, we need, what is interesting in this crisis, the ICT and information technology, but I don't want to say that, but I want to be the very provocative term, is going to be part clearly important of the welfare system. We have a segmented welfare system, but at the same time, we have a segmented ICT system. And we have to put together, because the relation between them today and the complementarity among them today are clearly the main basis for creation of welfare system. The other point that is important is about the policy. We need to expand the fiscal, and I want to put clearly the fiscal system. We need fiscal policy. Many of the countries are introducing that. We have to rethink about the more macroeconomic policy we have in the past. We need to rethink about that. Of course, we are not German, we are not Europe, we are not the United States, that they have the resources and the value money that for them is very easy to expand the policy. For us, it's more difficult because, as I said before, we have the external constraint. But on the other side, we need to rethink about the fiscal policy to expand our fiscal space and to have a new role for the central bank in this context. How say the director of IMF, I want to say with the ECLAC, the ECLA award, because for ECLA awards it's normal, but recently the director of IMF said, expand, expand, and expand. That is the moment. Maintain the recipes, but expand, because we need to expand on that. And clearly, other important problem that we have is the tax structure and the tax evasion. That is clearly what we have in the region, and we think that in this condition we have to rethink about that and to have the capability to recover these resources, because, how I said, we have to expand, we have to expand a fiscal policy, but we need to put attention enormous with the tax evasion and tax structure. There we have an enormous resources and ability. And I want to go to very brief to the ECLAC proposal. Which one to be, which?
Mario,
yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Could you, basically, time is off or up, but I still would like to have at least one question if there is one there. I'm so sorry for this horrible interruption, but I'm sure there could be questions, and we have 2 minutes before we go to the next panel. I'm so sorry.
I present the proposal and I close if you want.
Rather, just let me see if there is a question there.
Okay.
I would like
no problem.
Give the chance to any of my colleague ambassadors from the Latin American group.
Could you please raise your hand, whoever?
De algún embajador. No, de algún embajador. Okay, there's no questions from the ambassadors. Can you close down and we move to the next panel? If you can do that in 2 minutes, I would appreciate.
No, I want to see the proposal. I will leave there. I think ECLA proposing implementing a basic emerging income that many countries has adopted. In the short term, increase the fiscal space to design effective measure and strain mechanisms to support income, jobs, and company, particularly strategic one and small and medium firms, as I said before. In the medium terms, we need to rethink about the production model, and the welfare state is the issue that we have to rethink, increasing also to put it side by side with the production system, and to promote integration, I think is really important. And with these things, I close. And thank you very much.
Mario, let me see. Any question quickly?
Yeah, we have a question here from our social media. How do you think, Mr. Cimoli, that corruption has added an additional challenge to the current health crisis?
I think it is impossible. I think what is important to have in our mind that all of the policies that we have to implement, that have to be policy that support social and production structure, have to be introduced in the context of transparency, accountability, and supporting the democracy. Democracy is a process, not clearly is required to be consolidated in the context, but what is really important in this process and the measure that countries are putting clearly on the table, and the new measure that the countries are putting on the table, what is really important as well is to include more transparency and more accountability. We think that is crucial, and there is a demand for that of population. All of the policies have to be controlled, all of the policies have to be transparent, all of the policies have to be a clear accountability.
Thank you, Mario. Quick question from me, very, very quick. How the question of informality, how do we address that? The challenge of informality in the region is enormous, as you have said, 50%. I have the impression that informality at the end is a question of a system of incentives rather than just a question of the law. I think very often it seems to be a matter of choice. So it looks like countries have to create a different system of incentives so people can migrate, if I can put it this way, into formality. How do we do it? Or how do you see it? I'm sorry for saying this very quickly, Because we
No, I think informality for us is not a problem of registration of people, that the people pay tax or not. The person that are in informality in Latin America are people that can pay the taxes because the income is so low, is so unstable that they need the incomes to live. And the condition is we need to have incentive, but incentive to people, but incentive to create a production activity and give to people the opportunity to create an efficient production activity. The region has 80% of employment in small and medium firms, okay? And this 80% of the people, there is a large part of informality. What we need is to call an industrial and social policy to create this incentive for them. If we don't have that, this part of population continues to remain out in the margin of this population. The impact of this crisis on the other is going to be stronger. It's a problem of social measure, incentive, and creation those incentives to create a support production activity. What you call in Mexico, to create it a more stable and small activities, around the countries, what you call changaro. Changaro has to be more efficient, more with a health condition, because not all of these people is going to absorb a medium and high level of industry and firms. We need policy for them, but it's social plus industrial policy. I can help.
Friend Peter Hall. Peter, welcome. I already said lots of very nice things about you, so I don't think you need to hear them. You know them. So the floor is yours.
Meeting, and I look forward to that again. We at EDC are always welcoming of those kinds of visits, and I extend that to the other ambassadors that are on the line with us today. Obviously, this COVID-19 period has been a massive shock to us all, and the world economy was challenging enough before this happened. Now we are faced with this incredible challenge of bridging ourselves through this very, very awkward period of time where we're just trying to keep things going. And so, as we know very clearly, no industry has been spared, no country around the world has been spared, no income level has been spared the onslaught that really has come to us as a result of COVID-19. So really how we are trying to handle this as an organization is to ask ourselves the question, when we get through this, what is going to change and what is not going to change? And that's really what I would like to share with everybody today. And I do have a short deck that I can share with us today. And just give me a minute to get to that, and I'll be happy to share my slides together with you. I will just be a minute here. Very good. Okay. So you should be seeing my screen right now, and I will be on to my title slide in a minute. Can everybody see this?
Yes, we can.
Ambassador? Yes, okay, yes, very good.
Perfect.
So I've entitled it The Economic Impact of COVID-19 in Latin America and Canada, the same title as this event. And I do want to thank you very kindly for the honor that it is to me to be with you today. And I certainly hope that what I have to share with all of you is going to be useful to you. So as we proceed then through this, we can see illustrated very clearly the devastation that we are undergoing at the moment. For an economy like Canada and for most Latin American economies, we are trade dependent. We are travel dependent. And so when you see an outright 75% decline in the activity right across a global industry, air travel, That is a mark of how our trade is suffering. It is a mark of how our tourism is suffering. And it's hard to estimate all of the losses that will occur, and particularly the losses that will never be recovered again. And so here we are with how this 75% decline is hitting one particular industry. Are all industries the same? Well, one of the things that we are focusing on at the moment is this particular slide here. And I apologize to you. It should be more synchronized at the end there. It should be matching up one for one, but something has happened to the scale of my chart, so I apologize for that. But why do I put labor market on? Why do I put the Canadian and US labor markets up here particularly? Well, we all know that our consumers are the biggest part of our economies. In most economies, they account for 60% of overall activity. In the United States, which is a market for many of us, all of us, really a huge market for all of us, the consumer that buys the products that we send there counts for 70% of the economy. So the consumer in the United States is outsized in terms of its contribution to overall gross domestic product. And when the labor market falls by as much as we are seeing right now, and when that rivals the impact that we have seen in previous very deep recessions, and when it happens so quickly, we know that this is something that ricochets across of all that we are doing with this particular economy. Now, the United States is not the only place that this is happening, as we well know. This is happening in developed markets and emerging markets alike. So these kinds of drops, I have never seen in my career. I've never studied them in my academics, and I cannot find an historical precedent for them, for the speed and the depth to which we have actually fallen here. And yet inside of this chart, there is some encouragement, isn't there? Because we see that jump off the bottom there. And while that may not seem like it's very significant, given how many jobs we have actually lost, those movements there are about 10 times more than a normal movement would be in any given month. So that jump in employment there, being 10 times greater than what a normal month would be, is a very significant indication of what is coming our way in June and July and August, and as we get through all of this. And so I think strategically for us, in terms of doing business with each other, one of the key considerations is to understand really what the shape of recovery is really going to be. Now, some are saying it's going to be a V-shaped recovery. It's going to happen very quickly. Most people do not believe that. Most people think it's going to be drawn out a little bit. So some think it's going to be a U-shaped recovery. That's really what Fed Chairman Powell is talking about and saying, look, we could be down in the chasm for a long period of time. Others are saying, yeah, we could be down forever. This could be a new normal, like it was in the post-global financial crisis period. And so there are very wide ranges of opinion as to how we're going to get out of this. When we actually, as an analytical group, look at previous virus incidents, so we look at H1N1, we look at Zika, SARS, we went all the way back to literature on the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, 1919. And in each of those cases, the human loss was terrible. And there is no way that we can put an estimation on that. And so our sympathy goes out to all those who have been directly affected, either by getting infected by this terrible disease or succumbing to it as well. Nobody can calculate those human costs. They are terrible. But the economy, on the other hand, typically is resilient. And that may not be the most politically correct thing to say inside of this. But as we look at all of those virus incidents, the economy is remarkably quick at getting back to previous levels. And so faced with that uncomfortable reality, we need to actually strategically prepare ourselves for that as we go forward. So it's not an easy thing to look at this year's numbers, and they are quite shocking when we look at them, and to say, could we really contemplate a world that is dropping by 4.3%. We all remember back to January 1st, when we thought that we were going to be facing 3 to 4% global growth. That's just a few weeks ago. And now we're contemplating a world that is going to drop 4.3% this year. Incidentally, the IMF just came out with their forecast, and they're looking, I think, at a 4.7% drop in activity this year. And the OECD thinks it's going to be a 6% drop in activity. Some don't think it's going to be that significant. It doesn't really matter when we get to a certain point. These are just very, very deep numbers. So we can see that there's no region of the world that is spared. And in the Latin American space, on this chart here, I have highlighted two countries, Brazil and Mexico, but we are looking at all countries. We are doing forecasts for all of them. And these are particularly deep cuts in activity, particularly for markets that are in the emerging space. You don't typically see this kind of thing happen. You can see the number in China is only minus 1.6, in India minus 3.6. The potential rates of growth are very strong. So why is it that Brazil and Mexico and the Latin American space are more punished? Well, look at Canada as well. Canada is right there with everybody else. We are taking a more deep hit than the rest of the developed world. And why is that the case? Well, we, like Mexico and Brazil, are oil dependent. And the oil market is not going to come back very quickly. It was hit by a very steep drop in prices. The prices actually went negative, as we know, for a very brief moment. And that industry, in our opinion, is not going to come back very quickly. So these economies get hit by this and the dependence on other commodity sales. And the same is generally true right across the Latin American space. This is going to be one of the great limiters this year. A second factor is the dependence on tourism. Tourism is a great earner of foreign exchange for our market here in Canada and for many economies in the Latin American space. And so we are all experiencing the same depth of pain this year. Okay, we all know that. What we're really here to talk about is how we're going to get out of this. And so what do we see in our next chart? Well, we see a radical change in activity that's happening next year. So from these deep negative activities, we see very positive rebounds. And, you know, you look at China and India, they didn't go down as hard, and they are coming back at these very, very steep rates of growth. This is quite phenomenal, even for them to experience these kinds of rates of growth. The United States, a huge market for all of us, rising by 6.9%. So if these markets where we are all shipping to, Canada is shipping there, and many Latin American economies are also shipping very aggressively to China, and of course, historically to the United States, why then are these rates of growth not more robust than they are at the moment? Well, I was in on the previous presentation right at the tail end there, and some of the factors that are being raised there are key factors that are limiting growth prospects going forward. So the I guess difficulties that are being caused with respect to investment attraction that are occurring in both Brazil and Mexico because of the political situation right now. Well, that's difficult, and it's particularly unfortunate at this moment because one of the key outcomes of this whole COVID debacle is that firms are thinking about centralizing their supply chains, localizing their supply chains. So I've spoken to those in the auto parts industry here in Canada who are saying, look, for those things that we are selling into the North American space, we want to continentally, we want to locate those industries so that we insulate ourselves from broader supply chain risk. Now, I imagine that many Latin American economies could capitalize on this going forward. But if things are not secure with respect to the attraction of foreign investment, then that's a real problem. If companies are really thinking about redeploying investments at this point in time, then it's absolutely paramount that we, all of us, make sure that we are attractive when it comes to our own investments. A second consideration is the extent to which we're stimulating our economies. So it's embarrassing for Canada to have gone through a ratings downgrade by Fitch. We've lost, as far as they're concerned, our AAA rating status. And so reputationally, that doesn't feel very good. Now, thankfully, the other ratings agencies are keeping us at AAA. But the difficulties that we're facing at the moment on the fiscal side of things are causing ratings agencies to say, well, we're not sure about our ratings right now. And that's something no economy is spared from. If a AAA country like Canada can lose its very coveted rating, then other countries that are dependent on, let's say, oil and gas, other commodities, or tourism for foreign exchange earnings are not feeling very good right now about where their ratings might be. And of course, this is something that could very well compromise things in the Latin American space. It doesn't sound very hopeful as we go forward, but I will talk more hopefully as I end this presentation, because I do believe that there are some key opportunities that we can all take advantage of. This is just looking at our forecast from another perspective. It's putting it all together in one table, maybe a little bit busy here, but it allows us to compare and contrast our performance with everybody else's in a different way. And again, you can see the Brazil and Mexico and Canada situations as we go forward. However, as we move forward, and here is what we expect to happen on the currency side of things, not too much movement on monetary policy or interest rates as we go forward. And we really are looking at a flat experience for everything except precious metals as we go forward on the commodity side of things. So there are oil prices, natural gas, and copper as a benchmark for our base metals as we go forward. So many of us are dependent on these for our commercial activities and, of course, for our fiscal revenues as well. And so I wanted to share that with you. How do I finish up this presentation so that we can get to the Q&A with some key observations? Well, it's fundamental to know what the path of global recovery and demand is going to be. Here is where we have some opportunity. So you've seen the forecast, you've seen the difficulties that we have, but the opportunity that we have in terms of working together and engaging commercially with the rest of the world is primarily going to be how we react to demand going forward. I believe that regardless of the shape that the forecast takes, that we are going to have an aggressive period of growth. And that's going to come more quickly than any of us is expecting. Those economies that are ready to mobilize very quickly to take advantage of this demand are going to be the ones that do best inside of all of this. So securing supply chains, making sure that they actually work, and understanding that orders are going to be rising and that we need to meet those as quickly as we possibly can, that is going to be paramount. A second key consideration is really industrial mix and recovery. So China was first out of the gate. China started growing ahead of everybody else, and China's orders are starting to increase. They're not able to sell to the rest of the world, but they're certainly producing, and they need our raw commodities. And so keeping the lines of communication open with the Chinese economy is going to be paramount. And organizing our businesses together between Canada and the Latin American space to facilitate those kinds of trans-Pacific movements is absolutely crucial. When it comes to nearshoring and reshoring activity, again, there are opportunities. I want to cite here some facts that you're probably well aware of. Mr. Ambassador to Mexico, you are more aware of these than anybody else is, and that is that between the year 2000 and the present time, China has increased its labor costs to this extent. Back in 2000, it used to be 11 times cheaper to hire the average Chinese worker compared to the average Mexican worker. Now, because of the way that wages have increased in China, Mexico has the advantage very slightly. That's an enormous change in a very short period of time. As businesses are looking to become more local in their production, this is an enormous opportunity for Latin American economies, particularly those ones that are labor rich, because the cost structure is now much more beneficial. And in many cases, the education level has been rising to the point where this is an advantage as well. So I would say, keep your eyes very much on what corporate Canada and corporate America is doing with respect to the consolidation of their supply chains for the purposes of selling into the North American space. I believe that is a great opportunity, and the foreign direct investment implications of this are very strong. Reassurances need to be made. There's no doubt about that. They need to know that their investments are going to be secure, that they are not going to be embroiled in any kind of transfer and conversion of currency issues, political violence, expropriation, corruption. If anything, firms have become far more sensitive to that over time, and it's become a key part of attracting foreign investment. So great assurances need to be made that those principles will be upheld. I would say a fourth advantage is the deep relationships that we have with each other. The relationship between Canada and Mexico is a deep and a growing and a very amicable one. When I speak about the Mexican economy to the Canadian auto parts complex, to other manufacturers that are locating there, they are very pleased with the way their operations are going. And the only question is, for me, they ask is anything going to change? We like the relationship we have right now. We don't want anything to change for the worse. Please assure us that that is going to be the case. There are deep relationships that Canada has with Chile. When we signed our free trade agreement, people were laughing. They were saying, your economies are too similar. We've shown the rest of the world that similarly structured economies can make great gains in terms of foreign direct investment flows and in terms of the actual commercial flows as well. That has been an enormously successful experiment, and of course will go on for many, many years to come, I believe. Very good relationship there. When you talk about the relationship between Canada and Brazil, that is a relationship that in terms of certain corporations is well over 100 years old. Very, very deep relationships with the institutional investment community. And as a sign of confidence in the future for the Brazilian economy, our institutional investors have been increasing their investments there, even with everything that is going on. Political mayhem, infrastructure problems inside of the economy, and of course, things like COVID-19 coming up. We can look to other economies, and of course, I'm going to leave some out, but much deepening relationships with Colombia, with Ecuador, very solid relations with Peru. And again, I'm getting myself into trouble here because I am going to miss out on others. But even in Argentina, with all the difficulties that the economy has had there, some very deep relationships, and of course, Venezuela as well, in the oil and gas complex there. So there are deep relationships, a turn of events in the world, and continued vigilance on making the trade and investment complex stronger is, of course, very beneficial for both Canada and for the Latin American space. I believe in the last presentation, there were worries that were raised about foreign exchange flows and financial issues. Clearly, we are all going to be managing those very vigilantly as we go forward. And we need to remember not to take shortcuts when dealing with this because they're always devastating, but to have very prudent management practices as we go forward. And I'm so happy that we are not talking the 1980s anymore. We are talking about Latin American economies that have learned lessons from the past. And I'm so happy to see that there is prudent fiscal and monetary management. And I certainly hope that that goes forward. And I've already talked about the political risk side of things as we go forward. So our view of things is very, to sum up here, is that we are going to see a short and a very sharp increase in demand as we go forward. Our numbers illustrate that that is the case. And I do believe that we are all going to be rolling up our sleeves and dealing with current arrangements, supply chain arrangements, business facilitation arrangements that we have already. As the rush of activity occurs, that's going to be the first line of defense for all companies. So what is in place right now is going to be very, very important. And it's important that you and we secure those as we go forward, and that we make sure that we are doing everything that we can to ramp up activity when global activity increases as well, to prove to the rest of the world that the business relationships that we have right now are strong, they are reliable, they are dependable as we go forward. That's what the rest of the world is looking for us to do. And so with that, I want to thank you very much for having me here today. I'm sure that there are things that I have missed out, but Mr. Ambassador, Excellency, I want to pass it back to you again, and thank you very kindly for moderating this session and for your kind invitation to be here. And I'm very happy to take any questions that the audience has at this point.
Thanks to you, Peter, and your presentation confirms everything I said about you before you came. There are already some questions. I will give the floor first to my very dear friend, the ambassador from Costa Rica, Mauricio, and then it depends the number you can answer immediately, or we can put together some. But for the time being, let's go with Mauricio. Mauricio.
Good morning. My name is Mauricio Ortiz. I am the ambassador of Costa Rica in Canada. I want to thank the Embassy of Mexico and Sofia for organizing this important forum. And thank also Minister Mary for the presentation, Mr. Mario Chimoli, and Peter Hitherhold. Also, I want to give the welcome to Deputy Minister Michael Grant, that is present here on this forum. To Mr. Hitherhold, my question is this. You have mentioned all the relations that Canada with Latin America. You mentioned several countries, which is very important, and the opportunities that we have. But after so many years, we've seen the Canadian economy very related and dependent with the U.S. You correct me, you export in your services and business around 76% to the U.S. My question is, what is the plan to obtain different results to diversify the portfolio of industry and services in Latin America? Because if you continue to do the same actions, you will obtain the same results. And the results so far are, again, a very tight Canadian economy with the US mainly, very dependent. And that's my question. What is new? What are you going to innovate in order to diversify that portfolio and have more presence in our region? Thank you very much.
Excellency, thank you so much for a question that is a very challenging question and is something that I spend most of my waking hours in my particular job thinking about. And so I would say it's an excellent question, and I'm very glad you asked me that question because of my intense interest in this. So just a few facts in terms of answering this. If our trade relationship is 3/4 to the United States, as you pointed out, let's remember it used to be 89%. And so it has actually come down over time. Since 2000, back in 2000, only 5% of our merchandise exports were going to emerging markets around the world. That number since then has grown to 13%. So when we're talking about a share of trade, that is an enormous change over a comparatively short period of time. Now, I wish it was linear. I wish it was consistent. I wish it was happening on a year-to-year basis so we were growing more and more, but it seems to happen in steps. What I will say is that the success that we are showing in exporting to the emerging world at the moment, if those differential rates of growth continue, then it will continue just by the mathematics to become a much larger portion of Canadian trade over time. Now, here's where I have to go to our number 2 trading partner, which is China. So the United States, as you correctly pointed out, accounts for 76% of our trade. China is only 5% of our trade. But we are growing in our shipments to China by far more than we're growing on an annual basis to the United States. So if the average rate of growth from 2000 until the present occurs between Canada and the United States on the one hand, and Canada and China on the other hand, then China will be our number one trading partner in 26.3 years. So Canada is diversifying. The problem, I guess, is that when we go into the Latin American space, it is such a small percentage of our overall trade because of the dominant US that when we make gains in the marketplace, they seem to be very insignificant. And that's a shame because the diversification is happening there as well. Well, what we do in order to strategize at Export Development Canada, and by the way, we are an organization that is more diversified than the Canadian economy. And that's because of the space that we are in right now. We are far less into the United States and we're much more into the emerging world. And our job is really to take small and medium-sized Canadian businesses to the emerging world. And so as part of our mandate, we are very excited about seeing this continue. And we are watching the developments country by country because we are trying to nurture this. So whether we are trying to deal with the countries with whom we already have a bilateral trade arrangement, or whether it's the Pacific Alliance, or whether it's the USMCA zone or what have you, we obviously want to leverage that, double taxation treaties, investment protection agreements in order to further that trade, but in also promoting that as we go forward. And I believe that for Costa Rica, one of the key advantages is that many Canadians are actually buying summer or winter dwellings there. And they're bringing the news back of the opportunities in Costa Rica. And I would encourage you in the strongest language to leverage that to get the commercial relationship going there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. There are two questions from the public. We will read them aloud to you, please.
Yeah, Mr. Holt. So first question is, timing in terms of crisis recovery imply a long-term recuperation cycle, not homogeneous for the region or the world. What are your thoughts about this? Second question, it has been estimated that the Canadian government has spent nearly 146 billion in various measures to help people affected by the pandemic. When the government is spending this much, how will they be able to recover it?
Go ahead, Peter, please.
Thank you very much. So this will not be a homogeneous recovery, but every engine or every train has an engine. And it is important that the engine economies that drive things going forward see as rapid a recovery as possible. What we see for those engine economies, I'm principally talking here about the United States and Western Europe, those economies are actually, we believe, in a situation of pent-up demand right now. And that is the greatest assurance that I can give myself and I can give anybody else that those economies will come back very quickly. In our own forecast, even although we see an aggressive rebound happening there, we do not believe that in general, those economies will be back to pre-COVID levels of activity until the end of 2021. So it is going to be a bit of a drawn out affair. Now, the difficulty for that is that for those economies that are dependent on these economies, and I would count Canada as one of them, for a substantial amount of our commercial activity, well, we want to ride on as much of that rapid growth as we possibly can. But we have other things that are difficulties for us as well. So again, it comes down to the industrial mix that we see in our economies. If we are oil dependent, if we are commodity dependent, it is going to take some time for those price recoveries to actually happen. And we may even be into discounting, trying to get a greater share of the business that's happening in the engine economies before our revenues actually improve. So I do believe that there will be leader economies and there will be follower economies. And those that are more dependent on things like tourism, oil and gas, other commodities will experience more of a U-shaped recovery. But I believe that the leading economies of the world are going to see more of a V-shaped style recovery occurring in them. To your second question then, So how is Canada going to be able to afford things after this is all over? Well, one of the benefits, I guess, of being in Canada is that we had a favored fiscal position coming into this. So we had a debt to GDP ratio that the OECD estimated at somewhere around 80%. And the United States has a debt to GDP ratio, starting debt to GDP ratio of 105%. So there is going to be a lot of fiscal deterioration happening in lots of parts of the world. And I think that we need to look at this not only as an absolute deterioration economy by economy, but also as a relative deterioration as well. And I believe that Canada's relative deterioration is going to be more measured than some of the larger economies in the world, like Germany, like the United States, like France, and other parts of Western Europe. And so as that goes, our relative fiscal capacity, we believe, is going to be superior coming out of this. It's an excellent two questions. Thank you for asking them.
There's one more from the public.
Yes, one more question. It says, timing in terms of crisis recovery it is necessary to apply politic, social, economic, architecture mix adjustments in terms of state role to stabilize the economy in mid to long term. What do you think about it, Mr. Holt?
Well, clearly, when it comes to investment attraction, I can point to Canada itself and say that even in our case, if there's any kind of difficulty in terms of political stability, well, we might have a lot of difficulty attracting investment, ensuring the rest of the world that our supply chains are going to be reliable for them in a just-in-time world. That is paramount. And there's no economy that expects that more than the Chinese economy, but all of our supply chains have to work well together. So I don't have to pick on particular Latin American economies. I can look at us and say, in the past, we've had economies, we've had provinces that have wanted to split from the rest of Canada. And we've had regional differences in the West, in Quebec, in parts of Eastern Canada as well, where they have wanted to secede or cause political disruption or what have you. So, you know, we are not on some kind of an island where the threat of that doesn't actually occur here. So like ourselves, the same is true in the Latin American space as well. And if coming out of this, we do not manage ourselves appropriately so that we ensure as much political stability as possible, then we will suffer for it as well. Our investments will be in trouble. Our trade flows will also be suspect as we go forward. So the answer to the question is clearly yes. As much as is physically possible, we do need to ensure that as we come out of this economic debacle at the moment, we are governing ourselves to the point that those who are outside of the economy, upon whom we are very dependent, are not driven away from our economy by the political actions or the other kinds of stabilizing actions that we are taking.
Thank you, Peter. Two more questions from the public.
Number one, what kind of skills development in children do you think Canada must apply in order to benefit from artificial intelligence?
The second one, most of the Latin American countries have a systematic fiscal deficit. In your opinion, what would be good advice for the governments to attend the necessities of their countries and control their fiscal deficit without increasing the taxes in the short term during the crisis?
Okay, so thank you very much. Dealing with those two questions, and question number one, sorry, you're going to have to remind me question number one because I'm already formulating my answer for question two.
Yes. What kind of skills development in children do you think Canada must apply in order to benefit from artificial intelligence?
Yes, so clearly there is a push on at the moment to increase mathematics skills, pre-engineering skills, and so forth in order to accommodate that. We are developing here in Canada clusters of activity. And so we have the Toronto cluster, we have another cluster in the Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge area. There are some Western clusters as well. We have one up in the nation's capital as well. And these need to be fed, of course, by highly skilled graduates from educational programs. Clearly, that is an initiative that has been discussed much inside of Canada in terms of keeping up with the need for this. We are an economy that is going to be depending much more on skilled trades and as we go forward, and very highly skilled trades, I would say, because we simply do not have the population. There is going to, by definition, be more mechanization that happens inside of our economy, but also inside of the world. So it's absolutely paramount that we have matching skills. This has been a perennial difficulty in Canada because in the past we have had episodes where we are graduating people from disciplines where there are just not enough jobs. So we have lots of qualified people out there, but we have a labor mismatch that is occurring. So it's becoming much more aware of that and targeting our education so that we are graduating the kinds of people that industry actually needs. To the second question, really the issue of management of the fiscal situation, that's going to be a difficulty for everybody because there is fiscal deterioration that is happening all over the world. And on balance, the fiscal deterioration, I believe, is more grave inside of the developed world than it is in emerging markets. When we look at the kinds of deficits that are being running in the emerging world, according to tabulations by our own Department of Finance, the fiscal stimulus programs in emerging markets as a share of GDP are far lower than they are in the developed world. They're very high in the United States right now, and there's a lot of concern about fiscal deterioration there. They're very high in Germany, a place that is usually the standard bearer for the Maastricht criteria for Western Europe. And France, is sort of their partner in that. And they too are needing to embark on extraordinary stimulus because of the deep deterioration that they have seen in their economic fortunes. So it's almost as if the tables are turning a bit and there is actually more duress fiscal duress coming in the developed world than in the emerging world. We'll see how it all works out. But I do believe that we are going to be looking not just for localized or country-specific solutions here, but we're actually going to be looking for global solutions because we are all in the same predicament at this point. And so I'm not sure that anybody is less advantaged than others. Now, if I would make a shout out to two economies that I will pick on here, actually I can throw three into the mix, maybe even four. Fiscal prudence has become a watchword in Latin America. And so I look at the Brazil of the 1980s and the Brazil of now, where much more public debt is denominated in local currency, is held locally, and is actually stretched out into very long tenors so that the turnover rate is something that a crisis doesn't perpetuate itself inside of the fiscal situation. Those are all moves that were very prudent moves and very admirable moves. I would say as well in the case of Mexico, things have been put into place. Rules are there that say, hey, we're going to hedge out our oil price so that we don't get caught by the ups and downs of oil price swings because we're very dependent on those for our entire fiscal picture here. And of course, in terms of monetary policy management, interest rate management, and money supply governance and so forth, and currency stability, Mexico has been outstanding in that score as well. And I have annual meetings at Hacienda there to go over what is happening there, and I'm very, very pleased to see that. Obviously, Chile's history of prudent fiscal and monetary management is also well established, and other economies are also experiencing the same thing as well. So I'm very pleased that is the kind of heritage that we came into this downturn with, and I think that that's something that we will very much be looking to be sustained in the Latin America space. But we have to look in the mirror as well. We have to see ourselves and our own fiscal deterioration and make sure that we are all as a global community sort of governing this as best we possibly can.
Thank you, Peter. Two last questions, short questions from me before we conclude.
Yes.
You mentioned already China and your dynamics with China. My question is, how do you see the NAFTA dynamics with China, given the obvious political complexities that we are going through? And second, you hear some voices regarding NAFTA, CUSMA entry into force, the new one, that what North America should do is to become more self-sufficient. What do you think about that? And if that's the case, what is the broader impact of this?
Two excellent questions, Your Excellency. First of all, in terms of the China-NAFTA relationship here, I have a particular perspective, and we have held to this all the way along, and this perspective is what caused us to predict that there would be significant movement in the China-US trade impasse before the end of last year. So the stage one agreement I was delighted to see in the week of December 9th when that was actually made, because many thought that was an impossibility, and they certainly did not see it happening within that timeline. I believe that the whole philosophy that is driving US-China trade tensions is not that the United States wants to shut China down. We are talking about leaders that are around the US president at the moment who have either capitalized very much on global supply chains to China, or they have indirectly benefited from those as well. And so some of the original members of his cabinet clearly in a situation, and even Wilbur Ross, who is one that loves to talk so much against Mexico and against China and so forth, has benefited from international supply chains that extend into those areas. Yeah. So what then is the point? The point is that I believe going back to 2000, when accession was granted to China into the World Trade Organization, the United States has never been happy with that. And they've always wanted to make sure that what they viewed as being a trade table that was tilted was actually made more even. And so this isn't about ending the arrangement. This is about improving it. This is about strengthening it and making it more fair. And this is a president in the United States who loves to do deals. He likes to finish those deals. He does not like to leave things hanging, to open things up and create chaos and so forth. His whole thesis in life seems to be around the art of the deal. And part of the art of the deal is closing that deal. And so I do believe that for us in the North American space, it's a very tense time right now, and others may be capitalizing on that. But certainly, Canada has been able to intermittently benefit from the skirmish between the United States and China at this point. But I do believe that the codependence there is so great that once the resolution is actually achieved, and I do believe it will be achieved, then we will be back to being able to do much more normal promulgation of business between the North American space and China. And we absolutely need to do that. As we all know, the balance of growth is shifting to economies like China and to India, and even, I would say, to Brazil and to Mexico as well. Places that have large populations that once they start becoming more and more wealthy are going to be the centers of global demand. And so we at EDC are very much keeping our eyes on these developments, because we do believe in a long-term future that sees a lot of changes happening, and we need to position ourselves for those changes. Now, with respect to CUSMA and North American self-sufficiency, that to me sounds very protectionist. That sounds like old language that is really not about capitalizing on the mega movements that are going to happen globally at this point. So I would say that, it's very nice to be self-sufficient when you have something like a COVID pandemic that is compromising transactions around the rest of the world. But frankly, when you become self-sufficient in a low growth area, that's not a great achievement. I think that when you become sufficient to meet the needs of a world in an open and free way, then you can follow the course of demand and properly capitalize on that. Now, self-sufficiency has a word in economics that is not a favorite word of mine, and that is autarky. You know, there are economies that have wanted to become very self-sufficient. That's called an autarky. China is a great example of an economy that wanted to become an autarky. And their attempts to do that under their previous regime, I shouldn't say previous because it's still an existing regime, but it's gone through changes, but that impoverished the entire nation and caused it to be held back from the development that was in the rest of the world. In general, autarky or attempts at self-sufficiency really are barricades to trade with the rest of the world that ultimately prove to throw our nations into reverse, economically speaking. And so I hope that nobody finds that offensive. I'm just speaking as an economist who has looked at these things in the past and cannot find a case where we ring fence particular economies and say, okay, we're going to just operate in and of ourselves and we don't really need anybody else. That's just not the way international trade works. It's not the way efficient economics works. And ultimately, it's not a prescription for a prosperous economy or set of economies.
Couldn't agree more with you. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to my dear friend, Ambassador from Haiti, Ambassador Lyoto, for conclusions. Franz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Tremendous job. And thank you to the whole Latin American ambassadors group here in Ottawa. I believe this topic that we listened to today were a very much needed conference for all of us and for the people who have been listening to us. Thank you to our dean and thank you to the participant. Mr. Cimoli, Mr. Hall, we had two different perspectives on the first one being giving us a very cautious, sometimes alarmist vision of what's coming to us. But with EDC, maybe a more optimistic or point of view on what way forward will be for our different countries. In any case, I believe it was a very interesting conversation, very much needed, and congratulations to all our colleagues from Latin America for this collective work. In closing, I would just say, well, let's find within all this the best way to go forward, but to go forward together. Thank you very much, all of us, to all of you for your participation, and looking forward to have you on the 2 next meetings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you so much, Franz.
It was a great pleasure, and I look forward to doing this again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody that followed us.
Thank you, I'll say.